Today, you're going to be challenged to ask the question, how do you know whether it's true or not? Spoofing, spamming, impersonating, misinformation, hacking. It's likely that you've been the victim of one or all of those. And if the reports are correct, it's likely that all of that is going to get worse. I recently woke up to someone impersonating me on Instagram. Not a fun feeling. I've had people send out emails under my name, which weren't from me. That's known as spoofing. And it's likely that you've had similar things happen to you as well. I also recently finished watching a brilliant TV series called The Capture. It's interesting, but also terrifying at the same time, because it takes you into the world of deep fakes and the altering of CCTV footage so that people with power can achieve their desired aims. There's a genuine concern in many aspects of society about where this is all going to lead, and how does it impact how we function, how we connect, how we trust, how we engage. Because when you think about it, so much of what we do is based on trust, is based on assuming good intent. Now, in the case for me, the personality who was impersonating me on Instagram, it was pretty easy to spot that it was not me. In my case, it was things like spelling errors that were a dead giveaway. But for a politician who's being deep faked, it can be far harder to spot. And if you've ever looked at some of these, you'll see that it's really focusing on the detail that you're able to then distinguish what's real and what's fake. And with the generative AI that we've got now around us, that's just going to become harder. So with a society that's based on trust, you think about it. If your phone rings and it's a mobile number from a friend of yours and that pops up, you assume that you're talking to your friend. So much of what we do in terms of how we interact with people during the day is based on trust and the assumptions of trust. So what happens when that starts to erode? Where does this leave you? Do you stop trusting people? Do you stop engaging with people? Do you become hyper-vigilant, paranoid? Do you never trust anything? From my perspective, that's not a good way or a healthy way to live, but there are a few things to consider. Firstly, expand your horizons. The New York Times journalist Max Fisher, who wrote the book The Chaos, explains the manipulative role that social media plays in directing and stealing your attention, and how when we're scrolling through social media, we can think that we're controlling what we're seeing. But as we all now know, we're not controlling what we're seeing. It's the algorithms that are controlling what we're seeing. They're directing your attention in a particular direction, and it's ordered and sequenced in a way to steal and to keep you focused. But it's not just social media that does this. The world is full of distractions and people who want you to look in a certain direction. If you've ever watched the political satire movie Wag the Dog, which is now many years old, but it's still worth watching if you haven't seen it, a PR spin doctor and a Hollywood producer fabricate a war to distract attention from a presidential sex scandal. It's that classic case of nothing to see here, but hey, look over there. And while it's a movie, as someone who used to work in PR, I can attest to the fact that it's a classic tactic to deploy, and it's often very effective too. So you want to be really deliberate about what you're seeing, where you're directing your attention, and being alert to perhaps what you're not seeing and not hearing, because what you don't want to be is like Alice in Wonderland, falling down the rabbit hole and then waking up one day and wondering where you are. Author and journalist Van Bandam, who wrote the book about QAnon, talks about conspiracy theories and conspiracy cults and how it's really easy to fall prey to all that. And in the book, she recounts the perspective of the social scientist Dr. Joan Donovan, who outlines tales about why conspiracy cults are so popular. And in her research found it's because the truth is actually often pretty boring and doesn't play out all that well on social media. And also, they both add that when it's really easy to be anonymous and provide comments anonymously, we can hide behind that. So to avoid the rabbit hole, you want to be able to separate fact from fiction. And to do that, there's a couple of things that's worth considering. You really need to do your own research. You want to look at both sides of the debate. You want to hear both perspectives, seek out both perspectives, because there's always going to be opposites. There's always going to be alternate opinions. So who's writing the opinion that you're listening to? What are you not listening to? What do you find really frustrating and what annoys you? Because often it's the things that frustrate you and annoy you that you actually need to pay more attention to. You know, it's really easy just to hold one perspective, and I've certainly seen political debates, and I'm sure you have too, where someone shuts it down. And when they're challenged about their perspective, they're going, well, I'm not relying on evidence. I'm relying on my experience or my gut feel. Sometimes experience counts. Often it counts. But that doesn't mean it invalidates other perspectives. And instinct and gut hunches can lead you down the wrong path. It's also really easy to just share a part of the story, to fudge the edges, to manipulate, to massage something so it suits a political or particular agenda. So consider the agenda of the person who's writing the article, holding the opinion. What view are they pushing? What view are they trying to walk away from? What do they stand to gain or lose? What's their agenda? Because you want facts and data combined with a curious mind that's open to alternate perspectives. And then from there, you're better able to validate your sources. Is the source reputable? Is it valid? Is it reliable? You know, there's a saying that history is written by the victors. So what perspective is that author taking? What's the lens that they're using to view the situation? History is littered with lots and lots of examples of skewed perspectives. Sometimes that can be deliberate. Sometimes it can just be sloppy work. It can be messy journalism or messy authorship where they just haven't failed to explore an alternative perspective. It's also worth remembering that information can get compressed, massaged, shift and shaped over time. Just think of the game that you might have played as kids. We used to call it Chinese whispers, where someone would start and they'd say a phrase and then it would go down the line and you'd compare what was said at the beginning to what was said at the end, and often it was completely different. Quotes are a fantastic example of that. There's lots of quotes out there on social media that are purportedly attributed to someone who was famous. And then if you use a tool like Quote Investigator, you'll actually find, that quote wasn't said by that person at all. They might have said an aspect of it, but that quote's been altered or massaged over time for whatever reason, taken out of context, used in a different way. So you need to take the time to check, to verify, and ask yourself, in your profession, are there tools, are there processes or frameworks that you can use to help check and validate your sources? And as you do this, remember that you want to rely on research, not what Wharton professor Adam Grant refers to as me-search. Now, in the scientific and the academic community, they'll use a tool called the evidence pyramid, and the higher the material or the study is placed on the pyramid, the more scientifically valid it's considered. So at the bottom of the pyramid are things like opinions and information, but higher up the pyramid are things like clinical trials, systematic reviews, so things that have got a lot of rigor, analysis attached to it. As part of all of this, you want to be accountable. Get into the detail. You'll miss much of what matters if you're just hovering above the surface. It's really easy to hold opinions. We all hold opinions. But what are your opinions backed up with? How much do you really know? How much is subjective, conjecture? Do you know the whole truth or just part of it? Do you just hold lots of opinions? I find it fascinating. American professor Dr. Dan O'Reilly suggests that we all cheat up to the level that allows us to retain our self-image as reasonably honest individuals. What's fascinating is he and other colleagues are currently being challenged about the veracity of some of their research. You know, it's interesting. We can all rationalize our behavior. I've been there. I'm sure you've been there too. We can lie because we don't want to get into trouble. We can tell half-truths because we don't want to hurt someone's opinion. We think that someone's not going to notice or that it's not going to matter. But over time, it often does. Because when the rules of behavior or the laws of the game are grey and blurry, then cheating becomes even more accessible. Having clear and practiced ethical standards is vital because there's always a cost when trust evaporates. And so part of this is, what is it that you're really holding on to that perhaps you need to let go? Remember the wise words of the author Pema Chodron, who talks about the truth that you believe and cling to makes you unavailable to hear anything new. And that's why one of the important parts of all of this is to get uncomfortable. There's always more to learn. There's always more to know. And no one single person holds all that information. So the question for you is, where do you need to dig? What do you need to know more about? Have a great week.